everybody, and welcome to Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodity space. My name is Jesse Day. Before we dive in, standard disclaimer, nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. We bring you the information, you do the research. And today's guest is an economic forecaster who was instrumental in advising President Reagan on the creation of the G5 and who has since advised many high-ranking world leaders in matters of economics and markets. He pioneered Socrates, a platform that predicts market cycles, patterns, and trends, is the founder of Armstrong Economics, and a whole other list of accolades. I could go on and on. It's Martin Armstrong. Very happy to have you back on the show.
Well, pleasure to be here.
Yes, pleasure to have you. Our last interview is the most viewed interview on the channel. People really connected with what you had to say. I want to get started here with talking about the broad market, which many see as overvalued. We saw a small correction occur a few weeks ago, around a 3% drop in the S&P and NASDAQ. We, however, saw a much bigger drop in the Nikkei, around a 20% collapse in a couple of days. Commodities taking a beating around the board, from which many are still recovering from, with the exception of gold, which I want to talk to a little bit later. But people were proclaiming that the end had come on social media. Now it seems the broad market is recovering. It's business as usual. Was this just a blip on the radar, or was it a sign of a more severe sell-off to come, in your view?
People have to start realizing that we're all connected. I became famous for forecasting the 87 crash back then. And, as you said, I had been called in for the, when they were forming the G5 in 1985. Now it's the G20. And the idea was lowering the dollar by 40% to reduce the cost of exports to reduce the U.S. trade deficit. And I said, this is crazy. You don't understand that you lower the dollar by 40%, you're going to cause a crash within 2 years. And they had just sold a third of the national debt to Japan. And these people have zero understanding of the global economy. All right. The 87 crash was, I got called into the Brady Commission. You can look at basically, I think it's the last page. They finally said, well, we think currency had something to do with it. That was about it. All right. You can't get them to say, gee, the G5 caused this or something like that. This event is very similar. It's a capital flow shift. All right. I've warned that probably the country that's going to go bust first is going to be Japan. Their debt to GDP is somewhere around 260 times, it's totally insane. And what you have to understand is that in Japan, the emperor was perceived to be God. Now, he had to resign that title effectively after World War II. But that distinction kind of transferred to the government. So the big, crash in Japan in 1989, all that was because, the government came out and said they will support the market. I warned, I said they cannot. All right. And a lot of companies just lost everything that they had because they believed the government. So you have that very high level of confidence in the government in Japan. It's much greater than you have in the United States or Europe or anything else. So what you had here was Japan with its interest rates basically, going negative, etc. And it was coming to a head. A government fails when you can no longer sell the new debt to pay off the old. That's when the default comes. The amount of debt really is irrelevant. That's going on different things. So the Nikkei fell largely because you also had a lot of these hedge fund guys, just as they were all on Russia back in 98 and the Russian bond market collapsed and long-term capital management and all that stuff. This time they were all in Japan borrowing in yen because it was the cheapest. all right, and then investing elsewhere. Then as the yen started to rise, they're losing money. So then they had to pay off the yen carry trade. So as they're in there trying to buy the yen to get out of the trade, the yen's going up even further. All right. So as the yen's going up, you're basically forcing, all these foreigners, they were selling everything they could get out of the trade. The Japanese that had money overseas were now forced to sell overseas and bring money back. So you had this, sell-off in the United States and most of during the first week there of August because of capital flows. So the Japanese are having to sell and bring it back because from their perspective, the yen's going up, so they're losing money and denominated in dollars or euros, etc. All right. And then as the yen goes up even more, what we see is a 3% drop, they see as a 20% drop. All right. So that's more or less, it was very complicated, but it was the unwinding of this carry trade. And the fact that the interest rates were not going to remain low in Japan. But this is, I've seen this so many times throughout my 50-year career. When the Swiss peg to the euro broke, the banks had sold all these mortgages in Swiss francs to people. Oh, you'll save money and interest this way. Okay, fine. And then the peg broke, the Swiss franc went up, and people lost 20% on their mortgages. All right. The same thing happened in the 80s in Australia. The bankers were all selling Swiss loans to save money on interest. And then same thing happens. And all of a sudden there's a major financial crisis in Australia because the Swiss franc goes up. So, many of these people don't understand this, but this is the same thing in China. Much of, the Chinese government did not act like a dictator. It maybe should have, but it warned the provinces and these real estate companies, do not borrow in dollars. And they were doing the same thing, borrowing in dollars because it was cheap interest rates. Then all of a sudden that reverses, the dollar starts going up, and what you lose on the currency side is far greater than you would have ever saved in interest for a 10-year period. So you end up with these major problems all the time. And it's always the same scheme that's presented. So we have to understand that it's international capital flows. And when somebody tells you to borrow in another currency because it's cheaper than this one, be careful because the currency flips and you're going to lose more money. But this, I've seen this same scenario, as I said, year after year. I mean, and around the world. So that's really what sparked the crisis, this unwinding of the carry trade. Now the markets, I warned that, look, the market will then bounce back. The low should have been Monday temporarily, and that's all come out. You have to understand these are capital flows, and it's not somebody waking up and say, oh, gee, I think the stock market's way overvalued. Let me take profit. That wasn't it. I mean, that day's eventually coming, but not, it will be a different reason. So you're getting this bounce. And the real risk is that you basically bounce into the end of August, first week of September, and that's where you get more of a high. Then we've got all kinds of uncertainty coming from elections, war. That's when people start pulling money back because you don't know what's going to come tomorrow. And I can tell you, because as I said, when I was called into the Brady Commission back in the 87 crash. What was most interesting about it was that they went and interviewed all these fund managers. Why did you sell? And because it was this currency movement and not in the market, there was no economic number or anything of that nature. Okay. So the response was, you called your broker. Why is the Dow down, 1,000 points? And the response is, I don't know. That is the worst answer possible, because now you have no idea why it went down. It might do the same thing again tomorrow. So what do? You sell and get out. Because if you don't know what's going on, you don't stand there in the middle of the train tracks. And that's really what's happened back in 87. And the crash came because there was no domestic news, just as you just saw on going into the first week of August. These are different types of events. All right. That's what I'm trying to explain it. Sometimes you have a domestic thing. Oh, the Fed raised rates. They did this, whatever. You have something to base your decision on. When it's these international events, it's like, what the hell's going on? You call the broker. I don't know. Back then there were rumors that, I don't know, the president was shot with a bullet dipped in cyanide. Russia just invaded China, Europe, and nobody knew yet. The news is down. These are the wild rumors that were running around because everybody's trying to come up with some excuse. Why did it crash? So that's what August was. And that's why you saw the biggest drop in Japan compared to the United States. It wasn't a domestic situation. It was selling to get out. The same thing with Russia when they defaulted on their bonds. You had all the banks, even Soros lost $2 billion on it. All right. And they're all on the same trade. And so who are you going to sell to? If you try to get out, you couldn't. There was no bid. All right. So they start selling everything else in the world. Anything, all assets they had in Japan and New York and whatever. They're selling that to raise money to cover the losses in Russia. Okay. So again, domestically, you're going, what the hell is going on? Nobody knows. It's an event somewhere else, and it's a liquidity crisis because they just start selling assets that have nothing to do with any fundamental explanation whatsoever for that market. I just need the money. And that's so that is what August was.
Hey guys, just a quick break to hear from today's sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium. They offer personalized service and competitive prices with no minimum purchase for silver, gold, platinum, or osmium. Here's just some of the comments left on this YouTube channel about ARC SGO and owner Ian Everard. Have bought from ARC, good source and price. I cannot say enough good about Ian and his company. He is the most honest individual I could find in order to buy precious metals. If you are looking to buy precious metals, I recommend Ian at ARC Silver. He is a straight shooter. So go to arcsgo.com and contact Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And are we going to see a further unwinding of the yen carry trade? Was that kind of a one and done scenario? Is this a more systemic issue that we could see pop up again?
There are some people that are still in it. They're not really that. They pretend to be professional traders, but they're not. They're really not. It was the same thing with Russia. They kept trying to get me involved. I said, no thanks. When you're all in the same trade and something happens, you try to get out. Guess what? That's when it's no bid. All right. There's nobody on the other side because you are the market. Going forward, You have these people that misunderstand everything. And they're saying, oh, see, they're just looking at the charts from 1929. Oh, the market's up, so therefore it's going to crash. All right. They have no clue as to what the fundamentals were back then. And then you have people talking about, oh, it's going to crash because of the debt. Okay, so you sell the assets to what? Deflate the quality is usually you buy bonds if you're selling the stock. And then you're complaining about, oh, the dollar is going to crash and the debt is the problem. So what do? These people don't even understand what they're forecasting. It's like a tremendous contradiction. Then you have people saying, oh, it's the everything bubble. What this really is that we're back in the 20s, it was the private sector that was in trouble. All right. And so this time it's governments. So I can tell you what you do not want to do is have any kind of government debts, federal, state, local, you name it. We're in a process right now. In the 1840s, there was a sovereign default in the United States, but it was the states that defaulted, not the feds. All right. A state lacks the ability to print money. The argument is, oh, the U.S. can't default because it can just print its way out. A state cannot do that. All right. Most people would be surprised, but the number one debt crisis among states is Hawaii. Number two is California. And even Kentucky is up there in the list. You certainly don't want to be very careful about any state and local debt that you would have. Because this is where you're probably going to first see defaults. Because you also have this migration from the blue states to the red states ever since COVID. All right, so like U-Haul says that, everybody wants a U-Haul to get out of California, but nobody's going back the other way. And you just had Elon Musk say he's moving everything out of California. They just passed a law saying that if a child wants to change its sex, the teacher is not to tell the parents. I mean, this is reminiscent of Stalin and communism, really, where they taught children that your parents are not your real parents. It's the state that's your parent. And if your biological parents ever said anything against the state, it's your duty to report them. This was Stalinism. These people are calling it the everything bubble is because the smart money has been leaving banks, government, etc. All right. So, I'm here in Florida and I still get 2 to 3 calls a week. You want to sell your house? No, thank you. All right. Where am I going to go? Chicago? Not interested. So real estate is still rising in places that are more economically friendly. Florida, we have no state income tax, and they're fleeing, the highest tax states. New York, New Jersey, California, Chicago. So many people in Austin, Texas are now from California. This is just, so as they migrate, what happens at state economic level? Their tax base shrinks. So now they have to raise taxes to make up the difference from everybody that's leaving. And now California has woken up to that, and now they want to put in an exit tax. you're going to have to pay a tax just to leave. New Jersey did that, where, okay, fine, you sell your house. If you don't buy another house in New Jersey, exit tax. Instead of these states saying, gee, what are we doing wrong that people want to leave? No, let's punish the people that want to leave. This is not going to end well for them. So I would expect you're going to see more of the sovereign debt crisis will start appearing in states. So just pay attention to that, because they cannot print money. And the more they raise taxes to make up the difference, the more people are going to want to leave. So it's like a dog chasing its own tail. It's not going to end well.
Yeah, some really fascinating insights there. I want to touch on gold for a moment here, and where you see gold positioned. Obviously, we hear all sorts of information when it comes to gold from various sources, some of it quite hyperbolic, saying it's going to become a new reserve currency. The BRICS nations are going to start using it to settle trade between them, etc. You have people on the more moderate side and people who believe that the US dollar is going to remain reserve currency for a very long time. However, I wonder if you do currently see tailwinds working in gold's favor. Obviously, we have central bank buying. That's been a big story. I wonder what your thought is there. The persistent inflation, the debt that you've been talking about. How do you see gold's role in all of this?
You have to understand that gold is at least independent. All right. The BRICS is not about, oh, gee, the dollar's not backed by gold. Well, no currency is backed by gold. All right. And they're not going to do that. The BRICS is about geopolitics. Once they remove Russia from the SWIFT system, other countries woke up and said, wait a minute, if we don't do what, the White House tells us to do, they'll remove us as well. So China, the complaint has been from China and Russia's perspective is that they have to use the currency of their enemy. All right. But the reserve status of the dollar is not because of the government, the Federal Reserve, or anything else. All right. Reserve status has been mainly because the United States has a consumer-based economy. That's what rebuilt the world after World War II. All right. So Germany needs to build its Porsches and BMWs and sell them to Americans. All right. Japan had to make Toyotas to sell to Americans. Everybody has to sell something here. Okay. We are the consumer-based economy of the world. China has figured that out, and that's why they're trying to create the Silk Road, etc. Germany, on the other hand, is the old 18th century mercantile system. We just build things and sell it to somebody else. If you look at Germans keep their taxes very high because they're afraid of inflation. The net worth of the average German is less than an Italian. It's one of the lowest in Europe. All right. Yet it's the richest country. All right. So it's kind of an anomaly there. China has realized that Germany is not the economic model to follow. It's the United States. So they're trying to build a consumer-based economy. All right. And that's the big difference. That's the reserve status of the dollar. All right. And so this idea that, dollar won't be reserve currency. Sorry. This is the biggest place for people to sell things. And if you're going to do that, you have to price it in dollars in order to sell it. Okay. And so it's an economic issue. It's not what the dollar is backed on and who's behind it or anything else. That's all just, a bunch of theories thrown into a pot and shaken up. But the reason central banks have been buying gold is because the Biden administration has turned the dollar into a geopolitical weapon. All right. So it's got nothing to do with backing or anything like that. So they've been moving more towards, central banks have been buying gold because it's independent. All right. So, and you have to understand, don't judge them by an investor. They're not buying it because they think, oh, it's going to go up and I'll make some money. That's not, they don't do that. Okay. They're not interested in they're not a trader. They're buying gold. Even if it goes down, it goes up, they don't really care. They're divesting themselves from the dollar and euro. You can't have these people threatening World War III, and then all of a sudden you still have their debt. China dumped $53 billion worth of U.S. debt the first quarter. We go in the war against China. You think we're going to pay their interest to China? They'll default. They know that. So, I mean, this is basically, it's geopolitics at this stage in the game. So Russia is not going to hold U.S. debt. It's not interested because we're the enemy. Same thing with China. And a number of other countries are beginning to wake up to this, including India, Turkey, others. They're big. It's got nothing to do with the gold, dollar, blah blah blah. This is geopolitics. You cannot trust the United States if it's going to use the dollar as a weapon. So that's really what we're looking at. Gold is probably going to continue up a little bit more. The major resistance is really around the 27 area. Beyond that, the big psychological number of 3,000. But you're probably looking at that going into the end of the month. And then we're going to have to see. September looks to be an absolute chaotic period on our computer. Volatility is going to go up dramatically. And it's mainly because of all this uncertainty. And you have to understand that United States paid off its debt under Andrew Jackson one time because he was against central banks. And he was only against the central bank because they lent money to his opposition. That was basically it. It was a personal vendetta. You need a central bank, and because what happened was because he refused to renew the Bank of the United States, then money from the federal government was parked in state banks, and they were being called, Jackson's pet banks. So then that led to people using state bank currency, and you can go collect them. There's obsolete currency books on them. Every bank in the United States started issuing its own money, and then that turned into a fraud. There was some bank way out in the sticks someplace would print up money, and then there were brokers in New York, and they would ship them say, okay, fine, here's $10,000. What do you give me for it? And they would say, okay, I'll give you $6,000. All right. And the brokers were pocketing the difference. And then they were, putting this currency into circulation. So you have to understand that was called the obsolete banking period. It turned into the hard times, sovereign default. States started defaulting on their debts because they were trying to cover out these banks. And then we went back to a central bank. You need a central bank. There shouldn't be every bank issuing its own money. And there's too much fraud in that. But so, I mean, at this stage in the game, you're looking at no government has paid off its debt other than that one time with Andrew Jackson. Romania paid off its debt. Every other government throughout history has defaulted. Spain 7 times in a row. And every time they change governments, they default. You can go buy a continental currency on eBay, etc. The Constitution said they were going to honor the debt of the previous government. They never did. They defaulted on that too. All right. France, it's in its fifth republic, and no republic ever honors the debts of the previous one. This is why they want war. All right. You go with war, and what happens is you get to then default. And this is why you should be looking at, it's these guys don't understand what this everything, bubble is about. You're buying I speak to realtors down here and they say houses are like 1 to 5 million. People are paying cash. All right. They just want to get money out of the bank and they're parking it in real estate or something like that. All right. It's safe. That's really what's going on. So again, it's like the same reason that the central banks are buying gold. They don't care if it's going up. That's not the object. It's simply to be neutral. And that's what some of these people are doing with real estate, just to get out of that. They don't know if the banks are going to fail. They don't know what digital currencies are coming, whatever. So you're trying to get money out of the system. So that's what you have to understand is taking place. All right. Eventually, the stock market's going to go up dramatically. But first, there's usually what we call a false move. It's kind of like taking a rubber band. All right. You want to propel the rubber band across the room. You got to pull it back, right? And then you let go. All right. The market's the same way. It's got to correct first. We call it a bear trap or whatever. Confuses everybody. That's it. It's all over with. You sell and then it flips around and takes off the opposite way. So that's what we're going to get out of 24. 24 is probably going to be a high for many markets. And you may end up with a correction at least for 1 to maybe up to 1.5 years, consolidation more. And then it's just going to, burst through again on the upside. Because they want to take us into this war. And they will default. All right. The digital currency side, I can tell you what's going on there.
Yeah, please do.
The real objective here is that every government, and I've met in Europe as well as in the United States, all right, the consensus is that 35% of the economy is underground and doesn't pay taxes. So like I said, you hire that 16-year-old girl next door to watch the kids while you and your wife go out to dinner and you gave her $50. Oh my God, that's our problem. She's bringing down the whole government, So by going to a digital currency, all right, they will know if you give her 50. All right. And she'll have to pay her 50%. This is what they are looking for. Now, on top of that, the United Nations it's a serious threat to human rights. It's a serious threat to everything in our future. Honestly, if I was president, I would withdraw from the UN and kick them the hell out of New York as well. What good is the UN? The Biden administration refuses to even negotiate with Russia. The UN was supposed to bring people together to discuss things to alleviate wars. We don't even use it that way anymore. All right. All they want to do is expand their own power. The World Health Organization, we will determine when it's going to be a pandemic and you have to comply. Now they just passed this cyber treaty. And you look at the fine print. Basically, it's a threat against everything. If they're trying to expand the jurisdiction to worldwide. So, as I had put on the thing that on our site, Britain was looking at extraditing Americans and charging them in Britain for criticizing the government. So what? You say, I don't like the tie that Stammer's wearing, so I get 20 months in prison? What? They just put a guy for 20 months in prison for, I forget what he said, that he's sick and tired of his money going to migrants, who rape our children. 20 months in prison for that. That was it. No particular person. So free speech is becoming obsolete and dangerous. And this new treaty is so vague. And even, Microsoft and all the tech companies argued against it. Anything to do on a computer gives international jurisdiction. You write something on your computer and they can haul you off to Britain and charge you over there and throw you in a British cell. This is what this treaty is supposed to do. Honestly, this is what our computer is projecting, that we are headed into a major international war and civil unrest, and eventually civil wars. You cannot do this to people. Eventually they will rise up. All right. And we take it, and we take it. But eventually, I think this treaty, God forbid that it's agreed to in the United States. It's highly dangerous. That's it. You can be hauled off around the world for a crime that somebody else says you violated here in Turkey.
Yeah, things are getting more and more Orwellian for sure. You mentioned the UK police department threatening to arrest people overseas for daring to go against the regime. We also saw EU Commissioner Thierry Breton send Elon Musk a letter, an official open letter on X, saying you'd better censor your interview with Donald Trump. You're causing harm to citizens of the European Union. We won't hesitate to take action on you. How do you? I'm wondering. Obviously, you talked about this new treaty, very concerning. But you also mentioned an uprising. How do you see all of this playing out when the populations have had enough? And how do you see the fate of the EU as a whole? I've spoken to some people who believe that the EU will cease to exist over the course of the next decade. Would you agree with that? How do you see the fate of the EU unfolding up ahead?
The EU is going to fall apart. When they were forming it, they came to me. I met with them. They sent this commission to London. We met, and they were creating the euro. And I warned them then that, because they were selling it to everybody, we're all going to pay the same interest rate, blah, blah, blah. I said, this is a lie. It's not going to happen. The only way you can do this is if you consolidate all the national debts. And what really happened, because I was there, all right, Chancellor Kohl at the time did not allow the German people to vote on joining the euro. He took the country in unilaterally. And he admitted that if he allowed the German people to vote, he would have lost 7-1. All right. So he felt that the biggest criticism, because they're so concerned about debt and inflation over there in Germany, the biggest criticism would be if they consolidated the debts. So the deal was Germany will join the euro, but you cannot consolidate the debt. I warned them, listen, you're not a trader. All right, fine. All the volatility in the currency. If I'm bullish Germany, but bearish on Italy, I can, buy the Deutschmark and sell the lira. You eliminate that, I can still do the same with German, bonds versus Italian. All right, and we see that they all don't pay the same interest rate. I warn them, you're just going to transfer the volatility from the currency market to the bond market. They told me, well, we just have to get the euro through. Then we'll worry about the debt later. I mean, that was what, 1998? Nothing's changed. It's unsustainable. And people also have to understand throughout history, whenever you get this concentration of power in a centralized government, it always fails. All right? Because one size does not fit all. You take the abortion issue here in the United States. All right? You got the Bible Belt. You're offending their religion. California, you can do an abortion up to one day before. It's fine. They don't care. But you end up with different cultures in different parts of the country. So you can't possibly come up with this rule and say, oh, now you're going to have to do abortions. It's offending their religion. This is what's going on in Ukraine. All right. Zelensky is deliberately trying to create, I would say, the civil war. He outlaws their religion. He outlaws their language, tells them they can no longer have Orthodox Christianity, which celebrates Christmas in January. You must now accept December 25th. I mean, if Canada basically said we're going to outlaw French, I think they're going to go into a civil war. Or can the United States suddenly say we're going to outlaw Spanish? There's certain things you cannot do. All right. So this idea of concentrated power in a centralized government historically never works. That's what brought down communism. A lot of people don't know their history of Russia, but Stalin was really the evildoer, really. Lenin wanted to create a confederation based upon the United States so that each republic still retained its sovereignty like we have here. Stalin, the rumor was that he poisoned Lenin and his wife. Lenin had even written a letter, "Do not let Stalin succeed me." And he did. Then he concentrated all the power into Moscow. Dictatorial, etc. Purges, killed, tens of millions of people that disagreed with him, etc. This is what we're going to see in the United States. You're going to see the same thing in Europe. You cannot have this one-size-fits-all policy. And the United States will probably break up at least into three sections. The West Coast, the Bible Belt, maybe with the South, and then the New England area. And as more and more people migrate from the blue states, this is going to cause it even more. All right. You just had Elon Musk said that he was, taking all his businesses out of California because of their, law that, teacher was not supposed to tell a parent what's going on. In Europe, you're seeing the same thing. I go to Germany, and I was there for a holiday in Bavaria, and they said, "Oh, it's a holiday today for winning the war." I said, "Which war are we talking about?" "Oh, the war against Prussia." Right? Bavaria's Catholic, the Prussians were Protestant. Same thing as Ireland. The same thing as all the English civil wars. These things exist going back for a long time. I mean, I was in Athens when they were protesting against Germany. They were dressed up in Nazi uniforms. Honestly, like I've said, if a French girl brought home a German boyfriend, the father's going to say, "You do know what they did to us." It's just the way it is. When I was meeting with the Euro Commission, I told them, I said, "You don't understand what made America great." And I said it was discrimination. And they said, "Oh, how could you possibly say that?" I said, "Because it was fair. Whoever was the last off the boat didn't get a job until they spoke English." I said, then the second generation, you ask an American, "What are you?" They go, "Oh, I'm half Irish, half German," or whatever. You don't see that in Europe. Once everybody spoke the same language, everybody intermarried. All right. You don't see that in Europe so much because the languages are different. You don't see somebody from Scotland going down and marrying somebody from Sicily. if they speak the same language, it's doable. But if otherwise, it's not. So we're looking at our computers showing that this election coming up is probably the watershed event, because I don't see how anybody is going to accept this. Either way, it doesn't matter who wins. I think it started with Hillary saying that anybody that voted against her was a deplorable. Even Jamie Dimon at Davos stood up and said he was barely a Democrat anymore. He said, you cannot insult half the country. And politics is turned into really something very evil. It's like, okay, now it's my turn and I get to punish everybody else that voted. This is not civilization. Civilization is when everybody comes together, we all benefit. And this is like, no, you either agree with me or you're dead, pretty much.
And are we going to go back to what you say civilization could be? Because you see the breakup of the EU, the breakup of the United States, a lot of civil unrest, maybe even civil war coming up ahead. What's on the other side of that? Is there anything to look forward to in this scenario? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Will this rejuvenate humanity into realizing what's important and bring us together again?
Yes. This is when our computer's showing that after 2032. This is the culmination of the fall of republics. And you have to understand that, unfortunately, our founding fathers read Cicero, who was the fake news of the ancient world, right? He blamed, Caesar was this horrible dictator, etc. Just look at the facts. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, all the cities cheered. He didn't have to fight his way to Rome, all right? The Senate fled to Asia. All right. They had no support from the people. It was just corrupt. How many people would cheer if somebody stormed the Capitol Hill and overthrew the Congress? I mean, I don't think everybody would be horrified. They go, all right, fine. You're going to do a better job. You reach those points where republics tend to be the worst. Because everybody's for sale. And I've worked with governments around the world, and I can tell you, I could run for Congress, and I'll say anything you want to hear. I'll save the whales. I'll clean the water, whatever you want me to say. Then I get down there, and they go, great, glad you won. Okay, here's how it works. Day one, there's a meeting. All right. This is how you will vote. The decisions are made in a back room by unelected people. All right, just look at all the votes on things. They're down party line. All right, always, Republicans versus Democrats, whatever. Even the Supreme Court, it's a Trump-appointed guy. This is, what they don't believe in independence. We have surrendered all of that. That's what I mean by republics are the worst, because it's party politics. The party wants this. And who is the party? A bunch of guys in the back room who are never elected. That's why they're so afraid of Trump and even RFK. I mean, I was in Washington when Reagan was elected. And the Republicans were beside themselves. I said, what's the problem? Oh, you don't understand. I said, well, explain to me. What's the issue? Why are you upset that Reagan won? Oh, he's a governor. We're going to have to train him. Then go down the list. All right. Trump goes in, they stick in Pence. Biden's in, they stick in Kamala. Only people from Washington. They don't want outsiders. They kept RFK off the Democratic ballot. He's not one of them. All right. That's why they hate both of them. And I mean, they put up all kinds of, oh, if Trump gets in, it's going to be this, that. That's all propaganda. All right. They don't want anybody from outside. They hate RFK too. I mean, the Biden administration didn't, withheld any Secret Service protection for him. We now have found out that the neocons probably staged the thing to try and assassinate Trump. He didn't. We now know that the Secret Service sharpshooters were denied him for 2 years. All of a sudden, they showed up that day. Why? And they wait for the guy to shoot before they shoot the guy? I mean, come on. I think the latest polls are more than 50% of the American people don't believe what happened. Same thing with JFK. I mean, we're more than 60 years, since then, and they still have refused to release documents. I mean, this is the deep state. It will always act in its own self-interest. And I don't care what decade we're talking about, what country you're talking about. This is it. I mean, read Plato. There's a debate in there between Socrates and Thrasymachus. And Socrates is, believes in democracy, and you have Thrasymachus saying, sorry, you're full of it. I don't care what form of government. Justice is always the self-interest of those in power. Now, you're talking about 2,500 years ago. Nothing's changed. His observations back then still apply today. Just look at what they're doing to Trump. I mean, you got a house, you go to the bank and you want a mortgage. Okay, fine. I think it's worth $1 million. Bank says, we'll give you $250,000. Then they come in and they charge you and they say, oh, well, we think it's only $500,000. So that was a fraud. But I only borrowed $250,000 and I paid back the $250,000. It was an intentional fraud because you overvalued it. I mean, this is insanity. Banks have their own, people. You can say whatever you want. The bank's going to do its own assessment. I mean, but when you start tearing apart the rule of law, no country has survived after that. What is critical is I'm not going to invest, for example, in Iran. Why? Because they nationalized assets before. So would you invest in a country that you cannot trust the government because they might take it from you? If there is no rule of law, you will not invest. That's what's so critical. So I think the charges against Trump were really bad because it suddenly exposed the United States legal system to being corrupt. I don't care what you think about Trump one way or another. You cannot do this stuff to anybody. People were all upset about the immunity decision out of the Supreme Court. It's correct. If you can now go after a president, I don't care who he is, for anything that he does while he's in office, it's going to be open season. I don't like what you're going to do in this proposal, so I'm going to charge you with sexual assault because you put your arm around my wife. I mean, it just ends up being endless. I mean, there has to be some sort of say, no, you can't do that. In the Constitution, it is written as far as the Congress is concerned, that it states in there you're not allowed to arrest a congressman on his way to vote. They had figured that out, that, he's going to vote this way, so let's arrest him. Oh, you walked on the grass. All right. You cannot, that's in the Constitution, you cannot arrest a congressman on his way to go vote. So, I mean, obviously they put that in there. They knew human nature never changes. What can I do? Um, there was a guy that staged a big uh, walk on or protest about workers, in the Panic of 1893, Coxley. And he marched on Washington. And actually, that march is what they made the Wizard of Oz on. Because the guy that wrote the Wizard of Oz was in that march. All right. We're off to see the wizard. All right. That's Congress. The yellow brick road was the gold standard. And so how did they stop it? They arrested Coxley for walking on the grass in Washington. We didn't arrest him because of what his free speech is. He walked on the grass, you see. This is not the way things are supposed to be, but they will always degenerate to that. So we're looking at civil war. Even in England, you're looking at this. So governments know that they are losing power. That's what this is about. The more they lose power, more they feel that slipping through their fingers, the more authoritarian they become. And that's this United Nations treaty is the most outrageous thing I've ever read in my entire career. They can charge you with anything on a computer. Anything is now called a cybercrime. You didn't try and hack somebody or break somebody. It's a cybercrime by just doing it on the computer. So I mean, it's open season, and basically they can take you away in chains, which is something that you said.
Yeah, it is certainly scary. And let's hope that that doesn't extend to eventually interviews like this, where they drag us both to the UK and throw us in prison for daring to go against the regime.
It's probably coming.
Okay, well then I'd better make hay while the sun is shining then. Well, Martin, this has been a fantastic interview as always. Greatly appreciated the conversation. Tell us about Armstrong Economics and where people can find that.
It's armstrongeconomics.com. We keep it as an open site, so we don't sell advertising. You don't have to register, put your names in for anything. It's open, and it's basically a public service for the entire world. So that's mainly what we're trying to do, is help people at least understand what's really going on. And it's the computer forecasts are not my opinion. It's been phenomenal. I say it's forecast every election. And it's interesting that you see polls are being manipulated. They did that in 2016. All the polls said Hillary was going to win. Our computer said no, Trump was going to win. Our computer has beat them every time. In Britain, the same thing with Brexit. Oh, it's going to lose. Every poll was against it. Brexit won. Nigel Farage came down and spoke at our 2019 conference. He says, of course I'm here. He says, the only one said I was going to win. So, I mean, you have to understand these things are all driven by economics and everything else. It's not my personal opinion.
Great. Well, I'll put a link in the description to Armstrong Economics for people who want to check it out. And thank you once again, Martin, for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with the audience.
No problem. Just watch out for September. And then after that, just understand, yes, gold is neutral. And that's why people will turn to it. It's more for that rather than how much can I make next month.
And thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. For all your precious metals needs, head to arcsgo.com and contact owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.